She had always loved music. From the moment she could remember, the piano was like a friend she could turn to whenever life felt too heavy. But life had never been easy for her. She grew up in a small, crowded apartment where money was tight and opportunities were even tighter. Her parents worked long hours just to keep the family afloat, and luxuries like piano lessons or a real piano at home were impossible. Yet somehow, she had found a way. The piano in her life wasn't perfect. It was old, battered, and sometimes the keys didn't respond properly. Some keys were stuck, and a few made a strange, sour sound when pressed. But she didn't care. She had a passion so strong that even an imperfect instrument felt like magic. Every evening, after finishing her chores and helping her younger siblings with homework, she would sit down at that piano, her fingers finding the keys almost instinctively. She practiced songs she had heard on the radio, pieces she had seen online, and even melodies she made up herself. Music gave her a sense of freedom that nothing else in her life could. Despite her talent, she knew she was at a disadvantage. She had never attended a music school. She didn't have a teacher who could guide her professionally. And she had never performed in front of a real audience, except for her family, who always cheered for her because they loved her, not because they knew the technical perfection of her playing. Still, she dreamed. She dreamed of playing on real stages, of letting the world hear the music that lived in her heart. One day, she heard about a prestigious music academy that was holding auditions. It was a chance of a lifetime, the kind she had always imagined but never believed could be real. Her heart raced when she read the notice. They were looking for young talents, and they were inviting anyone who thought they could play to audition. She knew she had to try. This could be her chance to step into the world she had been longing for, but the path to that audition was not simple. She had no fancy clothes to wear, nothing that could make her look like a professional musician. She had to borrow an old dress from her mother and clean her shoes until they shined. She practiced the piece she planned to perform over and over again. Her fingers sore, her wrists aching, but her determination unwavering. She wanted this so badly that pain felt like nothing compared to the possibility of finally showing her talent to the world. The day of the audition arrived, and she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The building was massive, filled with polished marble floors and bright lights. Other contestants arrived dressed in elegant outfits, carrying brand new instruments or looking like they had stepped out of a music magazine. She felt small and out of place. Her hands trembled, not from nervousness, but from the thought of being judged by people who might never understand the struggle behind her talent. When it was her turn, she stepped forward, clutching her sheet music tightly. She tried to remind herself that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. She walked up to the piano, which was large, shiny, and perfect compared to her old battered instrument at home. She sat down and took a deep breath. But before she could even play a note, the panel of judges looked at her skeptically. One of them shook his head almost immediately. "Are you sure you belong here?" he asked. Another whispered to a colleague, and she could hear the doubt in their voices. She tried to explain that she had been practicing for years, that she had a love for music that had shaped her whole life. But they barely listened. They told her she didn't meet their standards, that she wasn't what they were looking for. They said it politely, but it didn't matter. Every word felt like a heavy blow. Her heart sank. All those years of practice, all those nights spent dreaming, seemed to vanish in an instant. She felt a sharp sting of rejection, the kind that leaves a person questioning everything about themselves. People walked past, some staring, some whispering, and she felt the weight of every gaze. She wanted to cry, to scream, to tell them that they were wrong, but she didn't. She simply stood there, trying to hold back tears, and walked away. Outside the building, the cold air hit her face. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. She wanted to hate them for not seeing her talent, for judging her by her appearance and background, but she couldn't. Anger mingled with sadness, and she felt a strange emptiness inside. She thought about turning around, going home, and never trying again. The rejection was so painful that giving up felt like the easier choice, but then, deep inside, something stirred. A tiny, persistent voice reminded her of all the nights she had spent practicing in the dark, of all the music she had created when no one was watching. It reminded her of the joy she felt when her fingers danced across the keys, the way music had always made her feel alive. That voice whispered that one rejection didn't define her. It didn't erase the years of dedication or the talent that she had nurtured against all odds. Slowly, she straightened up and looked back at the building. The large doors loomed ahead, but they no longer seemed as intimidating. She realized that her love for music was stronger than any judgment, stronger than any rejection. She didn't need validation from them to know her worth. She didn't need permission to pursue her dreams. She just needed herself, her piano, and her determination. As she walked away from the audition hall, she promised herself she wouldn't let this stop her. She would keep playing, keep learning, and keep dreaming. She would find another way, another stage, another chance. And one day, she told herself, the world would have to listen, not because they allowed her to, but because she would make them hear. That night, she sat at her old piano, the one with the sticky keys and the uneven notes. She played until her fingers ached, pouring every ounce of frustration, sadness, and hope into the music. She played louder than ever, letting the notes carry her pain away. For the first time since the rejection, she felt a sense of peace. She realized that music was hers, no one could take that away. And that was more important than any approval. The story of that day wasn't just about rejection, it was about resilience. It was about the courage to keep going even when the world says no. And although she didn't know it yet, that single moment of rejection would set the stage for something far greater. It would ignite a fire inside her, one that would not only drive her to continue practicing, but would eventually lead to a performance that would shatter every expectation, even those of the people who had turned her away. And so, she closed her eyes, her fingers still resting on the worn-out keys. She dreamed of the future, imagining a day when her music would reach ears that mattered, when people would listen not to judge, but to feel. And as the night grew quiet around her, she whispered a promise to herself. No matter what happens, she will never stop playing. She will never stop believing, because sometimes the first step in a journey isn't a success, it's the courage to rise after being pushed down. And she had just taken that step. Even after the rejection, she did not give up. The world might have closed one door, but she had learned early in life that doors could open in unexpected ways, sometimes when you least expected them. The small apartment she shared with her family was never quiet. Yet she found ways to carve out moments for herself, moments when the world faded, leaving only her and the piano. Her piano was far from perfect. The keys were uneven, some of them stuck, and a few notes sounded wrong, no matter how carefully she pressed them. Many people would have given up, complaining that an instrument like that was useless. But for her, it didn't matter. The piano was her companion, her teacher, and her escape. She had learned to adjust her fingers, to compensate for the broken keys, and to play melodies that sounded beautiful despite the flaws. In those small victories she found joy and hope. She often practiced late at night, after everyone in the house had gone to sleep. By day she helped her younger siblings with their homework, ran errands for her family, and sometimes worked odd jobs to contribute to household expenses. Exhaustion was a constant companion, but she would not let it touch her passion for music. After everyone was asleep, she would light a small lamp, sit at her piano, and begin. At first, the sound was quiet, hesitant, as if she herself was still unsure. But soon, her fingers moved with confidence, flowing over the keys in a rhythm that seemed to come from her very soul. She played songs she had heard on the radio, copying melodies note by note. She tried pieces from famous pianists she admired, memorizing every pause, every crescendo. Sometimes she would make mistakes, and at first it frustrated her, but she learned to see mistakes not as failures but as lessons. Every wrong note became a guide, helping her understand her own music better. No one in her family truly understood the depth of her talent. They knew she could play, and they admired her for it, but they did not see the countless hours she spent perfecting her craft. They did not know about the nights she stayed awake, practicing until her fingers bled, until her wrists ached, until her mind felt like it might give up. Music was her secret world, one she guarded fiercely. because she knew that dreams this fragile could be crushed by doubt or by harsh words. Sometimes she would sit quietly after a practice session, her hands resting on the worn keys, and think about what life could be if someone recognized her talent. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She imagined a stage, bright lights, a polished piano, and an audience that listened, truly listened, to the music she had created from the depths of her heart. It seemed like a dream too far away to reach, but she held on to it because without dreams, she knew life would feel empty. There were days when she felt hopeless. She would watch other children her age attend music schools, take lessons, and perform in competitions, and she would feel the sharp sting of jealousy mixed with longing. But even in those moments, she reminded herself that her journey was different. She did not have formal training, but she had something else: persistence, heart, and an unshakable love for music. That love had carried her through rejection, through fatigue, through every obstacle she had ever faced. Her practice was not limited to playing existing songs. She created her own music, small compositions born from feelings she could not put into words. Sometimes it was a song of joy, inspired by a small victory at home. Other times it was a song of sadness, reflecting the loneliness and frustration she sometimes felt. And sometimes it was a song of hope, a melody that imagined a life where she could play freely on a big stage, where the world could hear what she had to offer. Her neighbors often heard the faint sounds of piano music coming from her apartment. Some admired it, some ignored it, and some complained about the noise. But she continued. She knew that music was not meant for everyone to understand. It was meant for her to express herself, to survive, and to grow. Every note she played was a declaration of her determination, a statement that no matter what life threw at her, she would not give up. She also spent a lot of time studying. Even though she did not attend a formal music school, she taught herself music theory, reading books she borrowed from the library or found online. She learned about scales, chords, and compositions, trying to understand how the great musicians of the past had created their masterpieces. Sometimes it was overwhelming, but she tackled it bit by bit. Every new piece of knowledge became a tool she could use to refine her talent, making her music richer and more expressive. Her friends, few as they were, noticed her dedication. They would often ask why she spent so much time at the piano instead of hanging out or doing something normal. For teenagers her age, she would smile and tell them that music was her life, that it gave her a sense of purpose she could not find anywhere else. Some laughed, not out of malice, but because they couldn't understand the depth of her connection to the piano. And that was fine with her. She did not need everyone to understand. She only needed herself. Despite all the challenges, she also learned to find joy in small victories. When she mastered a difficult piece, she would play it repeatedly until it felt natural. When she learned a new chord or discovered a melody she liked, she would hum it quietly, feeling proud of her own progress. Each achievement, no matter how small, reminded her that she was capable, that she had talent worth nurturing, and that rejection from one audition did not define her future. Her family, though they could not fully grasp her passion, supported her in their own way. They would bring her tea while she practiced late at night, remind her to rest when she seemed exhausted, and sometimes listen quietly while she played. Their support was simple, unspoken, but it meant the world to her. It reminded her that even when the world doubted her, she was not alone. Sometimes she would think back to the audition she had attended. The rejection still stung, and she knew it might follow her for years. But she realized that it had also taught her an important lesson. Talent alone was not enough. The world could be harsh, and people could be blind to what truly mattered. That knowledge made her stronger. She vowed that the next time she had a chance to perform, she would be ready not just technically, but emotionally. She would let her music speak for her in a way that no words could. In her quiet moments, she imagined herself performing on a real stage. She pictured the audience falling silent as her fingers moved across the keys, the room filling with music that came from her heart. She imagined the faces of people who had doubted her, their surprise and awe when they realized the depth of her talent. Those thoughts fueled her practice, giving her the determination to keep going, day after day. She also learned patience. She knew that success would not come overnight, that talent alone would not guarantee recognition. But she had already proven to herself that she could endure. She could rise early, stay late, and face disappointment without giving up. That patience, combined with her skill, became her secret weapon. She did not need immediate validation. She needed time, persistence, and belief in herself. Every evening, as she closed her eyes and rested her fingers after hours of practice, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had faced obstacles that would have defeated many, yet she continued. She had learned to play beautifully on an imperfect piano, to create music without a formal teacher, and to nurture a dream that seemed impossible to others. And most importantly, she had learned to believe in herself when no one else would. Her story was not one of instant success. It was a story of struggle, resilience, and quiet determination. It was a story of a young woman who refused to let rejection define her, who found beauty in the imperfect, and who worked tirelessly to transform her passion into something extraordinary. And although the world had yet to recognize her talent, she knew that recognition was only a matter of time. She would continue to play, continue to learn, and continue to dream, because in her heart, she understood a simple truth. Music was not just something she played, it was who she was. And as long as she held on to that, no rejection, no obstacle, and no doubt could ever stop her from achieving her dream. Days passed after the rejection, and life went on as usual. She continued her daily routine, helping her family, finishing chores, and practicing late at night on her old piano. But deep inside, a quiet hope had begun to grow. She refused to let the rejection define her. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to give up now. She knew that opportunities could appear in the most unexpected places, and she was determined to be ready when one did, one afternoon. While running errands in the neighborhood, she noticed a small poster pinned to a community board. It was an announcement for a local talent showcase, open to anyone who wanted to perform. The event was not glamorous, not like the big academy she had auditioned for, but it promised an audience, a stage, and the chance to play in front of people. Her heart leapt. This was not the stage she had dreamed of, but it was a beginning, a place to test herself, to let her music speak. Even if only to a small crowd. She hesitated at first. What if she failed again? What if people laughed at her or ignored her as the judges had before? The fear crept into her mind, whispering doubts she had worked so hard to silence. But then she remembered the nights spent practicing, the sacrifices, and the love she carried for music. She realized that the only way to move forward was to face her fear. With determination, she signed up for the showcase. The day of the event arrived, and she felt a familiar mix of excitement and nervousness. The venue was a small community hall, nothing like the grand stages she had imagined, but it had a piano, and that was all she needed. As she waited backstage, she peeked through the curtain at the crowd. People were chatting, laughing, and some were scrolling on their phones. At first, she felt a pang of doubt. Would anyone listen? Would they care? When her name was called, she took a deep breath and walked toward the piano. The stage seemed larger than she remembered, the audience more distant. Her heart pounded, but she told herself to focus on the music. She sat down, adjusted the seat, and let her fingers hover over the keys. The first note she played was soft, almost tentative. The audience stirred, some still talking, some glancing up. She could feel the weight of their indifference pressing on her. For a moment, she considered stopping, but then she closed her eyes. She remembered every late night, every mistake, every small victory that had brought her here. Slowly, she let the music flow, her fingers moving with confidence, each note carrying a piece of her story. The sound grew richer, stronger, more deliberate. The whispers and chatter in the audience began to fade as the music filled the hall. She could sense the change in the room. People who had been distracted now looked up, drawn by the melody. Some stopped talking, leaning forward in their seats. Her hands moved over the keys effortlessly, weaving a story of hope, struggle, and determination. Every note seemed to reach the hearts of the listeners, pulling them into her world. She forgot about fear, about doubt, about the rejection she had faced. For those moments, there was only music. only the story she was telling with her fingers as she played. She noticed a few familiar faces in the crowd, neighbors who had heard her practicing at home, friends who had supported her quietly. Their eyes were wide with surprise and admiration. They whispered to each other, realizing that the quiet, unassuming girl they had known possessed a talent far beyond what they had imagined. Even the event organizers, who had not expected much from a participant they considered inexperienced, were watching in stunned silence. The music swelled, reaching a crescendo that filled the entire hall. She played with emotion, pouring all her frustrations, hopes, and dreams into every note. Her fingers danced over the keys with precision and grace, creating a melody that seemed to resonate with every person present. The audience was captivated, drawn into a world created entirely by her talent and dedication. By the time she reached the final notes, the hall was completely silent. The music lingered in the air, leaving a powerful impression on everyone present. Then slowly the applause began. At first, a few hands clapped, hesitant and unsure. But it quickly grew louder until the entire room was clapping and cheering. People were standing, moved by a performance they had never expected. Some had tears in their eyes, unable to believe the depth of emotion conveyed through the piano. After she finished, she sat quietly, catching her breath. Her heart was still racing, but it was a different kind of exhilaration, the kind that comes from knowing you have shared something true, something that no one can take away from you. The fear, the doubt, the memory of rejection, all of it seemed to fade. Replaced by a sense of accomplishment she had never felt before, the organizers came forward, offering congratulations and praising her performance. Some asked if she would consider performing at other events, recognizing that her talent deserved a wider audience. She smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. This small stage, this humble community event, had become her first real opportunity to shine, and she had seized it. Later, as she walked home, she replayed the performance in her mind. She thought about the faces in the audience, the silence that had fallen as she played, and the overwhelming applause at the end. She realized that talent could not be ignored forever, and that sometimes the world only needed a small glimpse to recognize greatness. She had taken her first step, not on a grand stage, but in a place where people could finally hear her music and feel her story. That night, she returned to her old piano at home, still buzzing with excitement from the showcase. She played again, softly this time, reflecting on everything she had learned. She understood that opportunities would continue to come, but what mattered most was her persistence, her love for music, and her willingness to take chances even when the odds seemed against her. She also reflected on the people who had doubted her, who had turned her away from the bigger audition. She did not feel anger, only a quiet determination to prove that talent and passion could overcome any obstacle. Their rejection had hurt, but it had also strengthened her. It had taught her resilience, and it had made her appreciate the small victories even more. The second chance had changed something in her. She no longer played just for herself or for the quiet moments of escape. She played knowing that the world could listen, that her music could touch others, and that her voice through the piano was powerful. She had learned that recognition might not come immediately, but if she continued to work hard, remain patient, and stay true to herself, it would come. From that day forward. She practiced with a renewed sense of purpose. Every note she played carried the memory of the showcase, the applause, and the realization that she could make people feel something profound with her music. She knew that bigger stages awaited her, but she also understood that it was not the size of the audience that mattered. It was the honesty and emotion behind every note she played, and so she continued her journey, walking the delicate line between hope and perseverance, knowing that each day brought her closer to the moment when her talent would no longer be hidden. She had faced rejection, struggled in silence, and finally taken her first step toward a future where her music could be heard and appreciated by everyone. That small stage, that unexpected second chance, had shown her something crucial. Greatness often begins quietly, in places where no one is watching, but it grows stronger every day until it cannot be ignored. She had found her first audience, and it had changed everything. And as she played late into the night, her fingers moving over the familiar, worn keys of her piano, she knew that this was only the beginning. The journey was far from over, but now she had proof that the world could hear her. And when it did, she would be ready. The next opportunity came sooner than she expected. A local event organizer, impressed by her performance at the small showcase, invited her to play at a larger community gathering. It wasn't a huge stage like she had dreamed of, but it was bigger than anything she had played before. The thought of it made her heart race with both excitement and nerves. She knew that this was her chance to show people not just that she could play, but that her music could touch hearts in ways words never could. The day of the event arrived, and she felt the familiar mix of anticipation and anxiety. The hall was larger than her usual stages, and the crowd was already gathering. People were chatting, laughing, and moving around, waiting for the performances to begin. She sat quietly in the wings, watching the other performers. Some were confident, some nervous, but all of them had trained formally, had teachers, and seemed polished in ways she had never experienced. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. She wondered if she would measure up, if she could meet the expectations of this larger audience, but then she reminded herself of everything she had been through. She had practiced for years, sometimes in secret, on an imperfect piano in a small apartment. She had faced rejection, had been turned away by people who didn't see her potential, and yet she had never given up. That resilience had prepared her for this moment. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked toward the piano. The bright lights made the stage feel enormous, and the audience looked distant. But she focused only on the music that lived inside her. She sat down at the piano and let her fingers hover above the keys. The first note she played was soft, almost hesitant, as she felt the energy of the crowd. Some people were still talking, some were scrolling on their phones, not expecting much from her. But she let herself sink into the music, closing her eyes and imagining the countless nights she had spent practicing. Slowly, her fingers began to move with confidence. Finding the keys with precision and grace, as she continued to play, the sound began to fill the hall. It started quietly, then grew stronger, more deliberate, more emotional. Each note carried her story, the struggles, the sacrifices, the quiet nights of practice, and the hope that had kept her going. The audience began to notice. Conversations stopped. Phones were lowered. People turned to look, drawn in by the music that seemed to reach deep into their hearts. Her playing became more expressive with every passing moment. She added subtle dynamics, soft passages followed by crescendos, delicate pauses followed by powerful chords. The music told a story without words, a story of perseverance, resilience, and pure love for her art. The audience, initially skeptical, was now completely captivated. They could feel her journey, the struggles she had endured, and the emotions she had poured into every note. Even the organizers and judges who had watched other performers were stunned. They whispered to each other, realizing that this young woman, who had once seemed unremarkable, was creating something extraordinary. Her talent was not just technical, it was emotional, raw, and authentic. The way she expressed herself through the piano left everyone in awe. She noticed a few people in the audience who had doubted her before. Some had been dismissive at the previous showcase. Others had ignored her at auditions. Now, as they listened, their expressions changed. Their skepticism turned to surprise, their doubt to admiration. They realized that they had almost overlooked something truly remarkable. But she did not play for them. She played for herself, for the music that had been her companion through every struggle. And for the hearts of those who were willing to listen, the music reached its peak. A powerful, emotional climax that filled the entire hall. Her fingers moved with a combination of precision and passion, creating a sound that was both delicate and strong, intimate and grand. Every note seemed to resonate with the audience, drawing them deeper into the world she had created. People were leaning forward, mesmerized, unable to look away or speak. The room was completely silent except for the sound of the piano. When she finally reached the last note, she let it linger in the air, holding it just long enough for its full effect to settle over the audience. Then she lifted her hands, and the silence was replaced by a wave of applause. At first it was hesitant, then louder and louder, until the entire hall was clapping and cheering. Some people were standing, moved to tears by the beauty and emotion of her performance. The audience erupted in admiration, a response she had dreamed of but never expected so soon. Even the judges, who had been watching carefully, were visibly impressed. They came forward to congratulate her, praising not only her technical skill, but also the emotion she conveyed. They spoke in awe of her ability to tell a story through music, to make people feel deeply without saying a word. She smiled quietly, grateful, but she felt a sense of humility. She knew that her journey was just beginning, and that there was still much to learn and achieve. After the performance, people came up to her expressing their admiration and surprise. Some confessed that they had underestimated her, that they had assumed she would be average because of her appearance or lack of formal training. Others simply thanked her for sharing her music, for touching their hearts in a way they could not forget. Each compliment, each word of encouragement, made her realize that her persistence had been worth it, that her belief in herself had brought her to this moment. As she walked off the stage, she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. Relief that the performance had gone well, and exhilaration that she had finally shared her music with a larger audience. She understood that talent alone was not enough to achieve recognition. It required courage, preparation, and the willingness to take risks. And in that moment, she knew she had all of those qualities. That night, she returned home, sitting at her old piano in the quiet of her apartment. She played softly, reflecting on everything she had experienced. She thought about the people who had turned her away, the small showcase that had given her a chance, and the larger audience that had finally heard her music. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the struggles, for the opportunities, and for the music that had always been her guide. She also realized that recognition was not the ultimate goal. What mattered most was the ability to connect with people, to make them feel something through her music. The applause, the praise, and the admiration were wonderful, but they were secondary to the power of the music itself. Her love for the piano, for the melodies she could create, and for the emotions she could express was the true reward. The performance had changed everything. She was no longer just a girl playing on a worn-out piano in a small apartment. She was a musician, a storyteller, and an artist who had the power to move people. She had proven to herself that rejection did not define her, that perseverance could overcome doubt, and that talent, when combined with hard work and passion, could shine even in the most unlikely circumstances. In the days that followed, invitations began to come. People wanted her to perform at other events, to share her music with wider audiences. She remained humble, remembering her journey, the nights spent practicing alone, and the rejection that had fueled her determination. She knew that every performance was an opportunity to grow, to inspire, and to touch lives, and so she continued to play, her music becoming stronger, richer, and more expressive with each passing day. She had faced rejection, struggled in silence, and found unexpected opportunities. Now she had proven that her talent could not be ignored, and that her music had the power to shatter expectations, captivate audiences, and leave a lasting impression on everyone who heard it. She understood that her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more critics, and more moments of doubt, but she also knew that she was ready to face the world, ready to share her gift, and ready to let her music speak louder than any word, louder than any expectation, because she had learned something that could never be taken away. True talent, when combined with passion and perseverance, cannot be hidden. And when the moment is right, it will shine, leaving everyone who witnesses it in awe. The applause from her last performance still echoed in her mind as she returned home. She felt a mix of exhaustion and excitement, knowing that her music had finally reached people, had moved them, and had left a mark. It was a moment she would never forget, the kind of memory that stayed with a person forever. But she also knew that this was not the end of her journey, it was only the beginning. She had discovered her voice, and now it was time to let it grow, to reach more people, and to inspire others as she had been inspired herself. In the weeks that followed, invitations to perform began to arrive. They were small at first: local events, school programs, community gatherings, but they kept coming. Each performance was different, each audience unique, and each time she played, she felt herself improving, learning, and connecting more deeply with her music. She realized that talent alone was not enough. It required dedication, practice, and the courage to share herself with others. And she had all of that. Her family noticed the change in her. They had always supported her quietly, but now they could see the tangible results of her hard work. Pride shone in their eyes as they watched her perform for friends, neighbors, and strangers alike. They had witnessed the journey from a young girl practicing in secret on a worn-out piano to a musician who could captivate an audience with every note. They celebrated her success quietly but with immense joy. Knowing how much she had endured to get to this point, she also began to inspire others. Friends and neighbors who had once doubted her abilities now sought her advice, asking her how she had managed to persevere through rejection and challenges. Younger children in the neighborhood looked up to her, watching as she played, dreaming that one day they could do the same. She realized that her music was not only a way to express herself, but also a way to encourage others to believe in their own talents and dreams. Despite her growing recognition, she remained humble. She never forgot the nights spent practicing alone, the rejections, and the countless obstacles she had faced. Those experiences had shaped her, and they reminded her to stay grounded. She understood that success was not about fame or applause. It was about dedication, passion, and the ability to touch lives through her art. Every note she played carried a piece of her journey, and she wanted people to feel that, not just admire her skill. One day, she was invited to perform at a larger community event, one that included local musicians and artists. It was an honor, and she knew that this audience would be more critical, more experienced. But instead of fear, she felt excitement. She had practiced diligently, refining her pieces and preparing to give her best performance yet. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music flowed effortlessly, each note precise yet full of emotion. The audience listened in rapt attention, some closing their eyes, others leaning forward, completely absorbed. She noticed people recording her performance, smiling, and some wiping tears from their eyes. It was a powerful feeling to know that her music was not only heard but felt, that it could evoke emotions, memories, and dreams in others. She realized that this was the true power of art, the ability to connect hearts and minds across barriers, to speak without words and to inspire change. After the performance, many people approached her, offering praise and encouragement. Some asked if she would consider teaching others, sharing the techniques and lessons she had learned through her own perseverance. Others suggested that she perform at schools, hospitals, and community centers, places where her music could bring joy and comfort to people who needed it most. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her talent could be used to make a positive impact beyond personal recognition. Her story began to spread. People who had once dismissed her as an ordinary girl now spoke of her performances with awe. She became an example of how determination, resilience, and love for one's craft could overcome obstacles. Yet she remained focused, never letting pride or external praise distract her from her true purpose, creating music that resonated, touched hearts, and inspired others. She continued to practice daily, learning new pieces, experimenting with compositions, and finding ways to express herself more fully through the piano. She also took the time to mentor younger musicians, sharing her journey and offering guidance. She encouraged them to be patient, to work hard, and to believe in their talents, no matter how difficult the path might seem. Her words carried weight because she spoke from experience, from the nights spent in solitude practicing, from the sting of rejection, and from the joy of finally being heard. She understood that success was not only about personal achievement, but about lifting others along the way. As her recognition grew, she began to receive invitations from larger organizations, including music festivals and cultural events. She performed in bigger halls in front of larger audiences. Yet the feeling remained the same, the thrill of sharing her music, the connection with the listeners. and the knowledge that her journey had made her stronger and more resilient. Every performance reminded her of where she had started, and she never took a single opportunity for granted. Looking back, she realized how far she had come. From a small apartment with a broken piano to stages that welcomed her music, her journey had been shaped by determination, passion, and an unwavering belief in herself. The rejection she once faced no longer felt like a setback, it was a lesson, a turning point that had pushed her to work harder, to practice longer, and to prepare for the moment when her talent could no longer be ignored. She often reflected on the people who had doubted her or turned her away. Instead of resentment, she felt gratitude. Their rejection had sparked a fire within her, a determination to prove to herself that she could succeed. She had learned that obstacles were not meant to stop her, they were meant to make her stronger, to prepare her for the opportunities that would eventually come. Her story became an inspiration, not just because of her talent, but because of her perseverance. People began to understand that success is not always immediate, that it often comes to those who are willing to work in silence, to endure setbacks, and to remain steadfast in pursuit of their dreams. She had shown that passion, determination, and belief in oneself could overcome rejection and doubt, and that talent, when combined with perseverance, could eventually shine through her music. She continued to touch lives, bringing joy, comfort, and inspiration wherever she went. Children, teenagers, and adults alike listened to her play, often leaving with renewed hope and a desire to pursue their own passions. She realized that her journey was not only about personal achievement, it was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to believe in themselves and to never give up, no matter the obstacles. Years later, she would remember the rejection that had once felt like the end of the world. But now, it seemed like a blessing in disguise, a challenge that had pushed her to become stronger, more dedicated, and more resilient. She had turned pain into motivation, solitude into creativity, and obstacles into stepping stones. Her journey was a testament to the power of perseverance, passion, and self-belief, and as she sat at her piano, playing a melody she had composed herself, she smiled quietly. She knew that her story was far from over, that there would be more challenges, more opportunities, and more moments of doubt. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever came next. She had discovered her voice, shared it with the world, and proven that true talent cannot be ignored. In the end, her journey was not just about music, it was about resilience, courage, and the ability to turn rejection into opportunity. She had faced obstacles that could have stopped anyone, yet she had persevered. She had shared her gift with the world, touched countless hearts, and inspired others to pursue their dreams. Her story was a reminder that no matter how difficult life may seem, determination and passion can overcome even the greatest challenges. Her music continued to grow, reaching wider audiences and touching more lives every day. She performed with confidence, humility, and joy, knowing that each note she played carried a piece of her journey. And though she had achieved recognition and success, she never forgot the young girl who had practiced alone on a worn-out piano, dreaming of a stage that seemed far away. That girl, who had refused to give up despite rejection, was the reason she had come this far, and she would carry her story forward in every performance, inspiring the world one note at a time.